Very pleased to see so many familiar faces in the audience and so many unfamiliar faces. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my presentation about sustainable higher education learning futures. Joseph Chamberlain was a famous economist who many years ago predicted the impact of technology and the fact that about every 50 years or so there would be gales of creative destruction which would wipe away old industries and create new industries. And he was talking about electricity, the motor car, things like that. And of course today it's the internet, which is a technology that's having a huge impact all over the world on many industries, on education. And here we see a recent estimate of the number of people connected to the internet, 1.8 billion people, and that number is still growing significantly every few months. The key thing in terms of underpinning my presentation is the notion that there are economic drivers for change, and I see that having an impact on education as well as on other elements of business, on government and the like. And Cairncross predicted this about 20 years ago, that the death of distance would be the single most important economic force shaping society in the first half of the 21st century. So for example, there's a lot of coverage in the press at the moment about textbooks, and they became a major industry in the 19th century when a distribution system based on canals and roads was created. So that enabled the distribution at relatively low cost of textbooks. The thing we see today, and Gary used the iPad most recently there, that very soon the e-readers and access to wireless internet for books and e-books will become a major force in education. And again, I believe the economic driving force behind this is you get a more timely product at lower cost. And that's just one example. And I think we see today a huge impact of the amount of new digitized material. And Ziggy Switkowski, who was the CEO of Telstra in Australia until relatively recently, has been arguing that the new digital content will, in the next 2 years, will exceed that that's produced in the past 30 years since the beginning of the digital era. So again, we're in this huge turmoil of change in higher education. So we see the impact of ICT, globalisation of culture, exponential growth in new knowledge and disciplines, and an exponential growth in the need for higher education, particularly professional development and lifelong learning. So in the midst of these major changes driven by the internet and technology, significant points of view have been expressed as the way that we deliver, the way that we organise higher education is not really adequate for the times in which we are living, that we may not be able to adapt to meet the demand and the complexity of higher education in the knowledge society. And the great danger in times of turbulence, as Peter Drucker pointed out, is not the turbulence, but it is to act with yesterday's logic. So we're charged with change, and yesterday's logic tends to be the common orientation to our thinking. So if we take just again one challenge that faces the predictions about the growing demand for post-secondary education, that it will more than double in less than 10 years. And yesterday's logic suggests that we would simply create more universities. But again, there have been studies that have been done on the capacity of existing universities. And Ashik Kanwar, who is speaking a keynote address tomorrow morning, was involved in a study with Sajan Daniel and other colleagues from the Commonwealth of Learning, which, looking at the capacity of universities in India and looking at the growing demand in that country, suggested that we would need to open 2 universities every week for the next 25 years to meet the demand in India alone. Clearly, we need to rethink higher education in many respects, and not least is in ways that we can meet the growing demand. The study that was undertaken by COL and UNESCO was in relation to the current capacity of universities in India, which includes some very large distance education universities like the Indira Gandhi National Open University. It wasn't based on a traditional, exclusive, high-ranking university in terms of cost of access or in terms of staff-student ratios. Presumably, if we based the study on some of the more elite, exclusive institutions, the figures would be even more challenging. Another consideration in the same vein is the prediction from the UN that we need 18 million new teachers for primary education alone within the next decade. Now, there's no way that the existing system will be able to accommodate that need. So the leadership challenge that we have is looking at how to change universities, how to vary the business models, the approach, the organization, because it's simply clear that the classroom-based teaching and learning model will not be capable of meeting the demands that are being placed upon higher education. So one thing that's reassuring is that education is a process and not a place. So the point that I'd like to make strongly is that in both developed and developing countries in time, that the internet will provide the only viable, cost-effective means to meet the demands for education and continuing professional development. That's something that all the managers of higher education and of other institutions need to take very seriously. So a key question in the context of global learning in the broadest sense is how can emerging technologies be used in developed countries to meet ever-increasing demand, while at the same time assisting developing countries in educating their people. And in many respects, global learning has similar characteristics to global warming, that to have an impact on such apparently insurmountable challenges, we need progressive and proactive leadership. We need to use innovative technologies, and we need to be able to generate effective collaboration. So with these underlying themes, I'd like to suggest that the challenge is really in changing universities, and this study that was done by the European Open and Distance Learning Liaison Committee a few years ago suggested that that's the hub of the problem, that the leaders of universities at that time aren't really well placed to manage the impact of ICT and to change systems and institutions that are notoriously slow to change. I don't believe that that situation has changed a great deal at the moment.